What is up, enthusiasts? It is Cedar here, and welcome back to another one of my videos. Yes, we are talking about the one and the only Top Thrill Dragster once again. This roller coaster has been, to say the least, a very hot topic in the coaster industry because no one really knows what's going to happen about it. Usually when a coaster announces that it's closing, they just say the ride's closing. But when Cedar Point issued their press release on Top Thrill Dragster's fate, they definitely had an interesting set of words. They say that after 19 seasons of operating, Top Thrill Dragster as we know it will be retired. And in the next part it says, Cedar Point's legacy of ride innovation continues, and our team is hard at work, creating a new and reimagined ride experience. Reimagined is the word of the day, or rather the month. People have been talking about this part of the post for way too long. So what's going to happen? Today, I rounded up a few possibilities and asked some of you guys for your answers, and today, we are going to look at some possibilities. This is Cedar Flags, and today I will be answering the question, how could Top Thrill Dragster be reimagined? So the point of this video is to do a couple things. One, talk about some personal scenarios that I came up with Top Thrill Dragster's future, and two, talk about some fan-made submissions. That is right, earlier I posted something on my community page asking about the future of Dragster, and I definitely got some interesting comments. So without further ado, let's get into the first part of the video, the scenarios that I thought about. Scenario number 1, Top Thrill Dragster gets replaced with an LSM launch. Now, if you don't know, Top Thrill Dragster has a hydraulic launch right now, which was a very popular way to launch coasters in the early 2000s with Intamin, but has since become very outdated, costly, and unreliable. This is a very hard to keep up with launch system and is one of the main reasons that this ride goes down all the time. So, them replacing that with a more modern launch system and LSM launch, which is powered by magnets and not by compression, this would be a very good idea. Now, there are a few things that they could do with the LSM launch, and a lot of these other scenarios involve this. But in this first scenario, this is only assuming that that's the only change with the ride. Now, I have to say, I have a little bit of an issue with just changing the launch system and nothing else. Many people ride Top Thrill Dragster just for the hydraulic launch, and many people prefer the feeling of a hydraulic launch than a magnetic launch. So if they just got rid of one of the best parts of the ride, made it just slightly worse, and then reopened the ride, I feel like that would get a lot of complaints. But anyways, I feel like if they added some extra elements to it, then the ride would be much better. Let's get into that right now. Scenario number 2, Dragster gets a swing launch. Now, this is one I've seen tossed around on the internet, and I think this is a really cool and clever idea, and something I never really thought about. So this depicts that Top Thrill Dragster will reopen as a new coaster with a swing launch, and this would require a lot, but I really like the idea of this. If you don't know what a swing launch is, there are a few of these appearing all over the world. It basically launches you forwards, backwards, and then forwards again. It's similar to how the Intamin impulses like Wicked Twister work. I think on Dragster this would be interesting. They would have to make a new spike that goes backwards, and I feel like this would be such a cool element. It would be the world's tallest backward spike going into that top hat. I think this would be a very mesmerizing ride, and it would look even more impressive on the Cedar Point skyline. And honestly, I think this one is pretty likely as well. Scenario 3, a layout extension. Now, this would take the previous structure of Top Thrill Dragster and make it an even better ride after the remodelation. This would require some sort of change in the layout. Maybe another element after the top hat, maybe make the top hat inverted, maybe make the top hat as tall as 500 feet. But what this basically means is that there would still be a coaster here, but they would completely change the layout, maybe add some elements after the top hat, maybe just make this ride more interesting than it was before. This could be an incredible coaster after a remodelation, and I think overall this would be the best possible scenario, because we would 1, be getting a similar ride, but 2, getting a much better ride out of this scenario. So as cool as I think this would be, this is definitely one of the less likely ones. Anyways, let's move on. Scenario number 4, Top Thrill Dragster gets the S&S treatment. Now what do I mean by this? There has been rumors recently the Top Thrill Dragster may not be remodeled by Intamin, and that the end product of this may be by another manufacturer entirely. So what if they stripped the track, replaced it with SNS track, and put an air compressed launch in its place, similar to something like Max Force? I think this would be a really cool idea in so many ways, because it would, well, continue the legacy of a compression launch, and it would probably be the most similar to how Dragster is right now. Though this is definitely one of the less likely ones. Cedar Point doesn't work too often with SNS, and when they do, it's for smaller projects like Tumbili or Power Tower, etc. But if they were that ambitious, I think they could do it. Scenario number 5, a reuse of the top hat. So this is assuming that Top Thrill Dragster as a roller coaster does not reopen. So let's say that they tore down all the track, removed everything except for the top hat. The top hat is now a standalone structure. They could do a lot with that. They could use it for a whole nother roller coaster in the future. They could use it as a drop tower. They could use it as an observation ride. Now this is probably the most interesting, not the one I would want the most, but definitely one that would surprise me. This is a very interesting one, and I've heard this in the past, and I feel like if they did this, they would probably get a lot of complaints. So I really think that this is the least likely out of everyone I've said so far, but I think all of these are in the realm of possibility. I think that a combination of some of these scenarios could be likely as well. Like they could add an air compressed launch, but then also add some more elements. But those scenarios are the most basic ones I could think about. Let me know what you thought about those in the comments below. Anyways, let's get to this video's second part. So I chose a few of these, only about 5 of them, because these 5 really stood out for me. So the first one is by a Dot Wilson, I assume that's how you pronounce it, and they said an inverted top hat. Now this is very similar to that one scenario where I said that they would change the layout. Let's say that they retracked the whole ride and made the top hat go upside down. You know how good that would be to market? I feel like that would be a very good marketable ride. Not only would it be a 400-foot tall coaster, it would be a 400-foot tall inversion, doubling the previous record at Kennywood. The second thing that I saw was by Hard Boiled Mutt, and they said they're going to knock the ride down and replace it with a restaurant. I mean, we are talking about Cedar Point here. The fourth possibility is by an account called the Gunpla Frog. I assumed I pronounced that right, and they said an air launch with a new theme. I think a new theme is inevitable at this point. The way that they marketed it, it's definitely going to be renamed and maybe have a slightly different theme, but I really think that air launch scenario that I talked about earlier was a very good idea. And finally, the most ambitious of all of the things that I saw on that page, it is by Goonch79. They said reuse disaster transports theming, add LSMs, a swing launch, a vertical spike, and then use tunnels for safety. Call it Top Thrill Transport. That would definitely be a good nostalgic sense. Having 2 defunct rides come together, this would be an interesting one. We know that Disaster Dave is in the Gatekeeper station, so it is not out of the realm of possibilities. But let me know what you think in the comments below. This is Cedar Flags, and I will see you all later.